Imagine a vast plain stretching as far as the eye can see. Now picture this plain teeming with tanks, soldiers and aircraft, all poised for a single devastating purpose invasion. This was Operation Barbarossa, a turning point in World War II, launched by Nazi Germany against the Soviet Union on June 22, 1941. It marked a turning point not for its success, but for its catastrophic failure. This ambitious operation, intended to crush the Soviet Union in a swift and decisive blow, would ultimately backfire, dragging Germany into a war of attrition it could not win. The sheer scale of Barbarossa was unprecedented. Over 3 million German soldiers, alongside troops from their allies, surged across a 2,900-kilometer front, targeting Leningrad in the north, Moscow in the center, and the resource-rich regions of Ukraine in the south. The operation was named after Frederick Barbarossa, a Holy Roman Emperor who symbolized German expansionism, highlighting the Nazi ambition to conquer and control Eastern Europe. This invasion, however, would prove to be a grave miscalculation, costing millions of lives and forever altering the course of the war. To understand the motivations behind Operation Barbarossa, we must delve into the ideology that fueled Nazi Germany. Adolf Hitler, the architect of this ambitious plan, believed in the concept of Lebensraum, living space for the German people, which he aimed to acquire by conquering vast territories in the east. Hitler saw the Soviet Union, with its vast resources and fertile land, as the key to achieving this goal. Furthermore, Hitler viewed the Soviet Union, with its communist ideology, as an existential threat to Germany and Europe. He believed that a preemptive strike against the Soviet Union was necessary to eliminate this threat and secure Germany's dominance in Europe. The Nazi-Soviet Pact of 1939, which divided Poland between the two powers, provided a temporary truce. However, Hitler always viewed this pact as a strategic maneuver, a way to buy time before unleashing his true intentions upon the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa pitted two formidable dictators against each other: Adolf Hitler, the ruthless leader of Nazi Germany, and Joseph Stalin, the equally ruthless dictator of the Soviet Union. Hitler, driven by his twisted ideology and insatiable ambition, sought to establish a vast German empire in the east. Stalin, on the other hand, aimed to consolidate his power and spread communist ideology throughout Europe. Their armies reflected their leadership. The German Wehrmacht, under the command of skilled generals like Heinz Guderian and Erich von Manstein, was a highly mechanized force known for its blitzkrieg tactics, lightning-fast attacks designed to overwhelm the enemy. The Soviet Red Army, while larger in numbers, suffered from poor leadership and outdated equipment, at least initially. However, the Soviets possessed a key advantage: the vastness of their land and the harshness of the Russian winter, factors that Hitler severely underestimated in his planning. The planning for Operation Barbarossa was a testament to both German military prowess and Hitler's fatal overconfidence. The plan relied heavily on the element of surprise and the effectiveness of blitzkrieg tactics, which had proven successful in previous campaigns against Poland and France. The German High Command believed that they could deliver a knockout blow to the Soviet Union within a matter of months before the harsh Russian winter set in. The plan called for a three-pronged attack. Army Group North was to capture Leningrad, a major industrial center and port city. Army Group Center was tasked with encircling and destroying Soviet forces near Minsk and Smolensk before pushing on to capture Moscow, the Soviet capital. Army Group South aimed to secure the resource-rich regions of Ukraine and the Caucasus, vital for their oil and agricultural production. This ambitious plan, however, was based on several flawed assumptions, namely, the speed of the German advance, the strength of the Soviet resistance, and the impact of the Russian terrain and climate. Into the Russian bear's den. The invasion begins. At dawn on June 22, 1941, the relative peace of the Eastern Front was shattered by the roar of German artillery and the thunderous drone of Luftwaffe bombers. Operation Barbarossa had begun. Catching the Soviets completely off guard, the German war machine surged across the border, achieving significant gains in the first few weeks of the invasion. The Luftwaffe, enjoying air superiority, rained bombs on Soviet airfields, communication centers, and troop concentrations, crippling the Soviet ability to respond effectively. The blitzkrieg seemed to be working. Panzer divisions, spearheaded by fast-moving tanks, exploited gaps in the Soviet lines, encircling and destroying entire Soviet armies. The Red Army, poorly led and equipped, reeled under the ferocity of the German onslaught. By July, German forces had advanced hundreds of kilometers into Soviet territory, capturing vast amounts of land and inflicting heavy casualties on the Red Army. The initial success of Barbarossa seemed to confirm Hitler's belief in a swift and decisive victory. However, this early triumph would prove to be deceptive. A grim litany of key battles and stalemates. As the German advance continued, the Soviets began to regroup and mount a fierce resistance. The Battle of Smolensk, fought throughout July and August of 1941, marked the first major Soviet counteroffensive. Although ultimately unsuccessful in halting the German advance, it inflicted heavy casualties on the Wehrmacht and bought precious time for the Soviets to reinforce their defenses around Moscow. The Battle of Moscow, beginning in October 1941, proved to be a turning point in Operation Barbarossa. The Germans, exhausted from months of fighting and hampered by logistical problems, encountered fierce resistance from the Red Army, bolstered by fresh Siberian divisions and determined to defend their capital. The harsh Russian winter, which set in earlier than expected, further hindered the German advance, turning the battlefield into a frozen quagmire. By December, the German offensive had ground to a halt. Their forces depleted and their morale shattered by the tenacious Soviet defense. The tide turns. Barbarossa's devastating failure. The failure to capture Moscow marked the beginning of the end for Operation Barbarossa. The German plan for a swift and decisive victory lay in ruins, shattered by the resilience of the Soviet people, the harshness of the Russian winter, and Hitler's strategic miscalculations. Instead of a quick victory, Germany now found itself bogged down in a protracted war of attrition, a war it was ill-prepared to fight. Despite launching renewed offensives in 1942, most notably the Battle of Stalingrad, the Germans were unable to deliver a decisive blow to the Soviet Union. The tide of war had turned. The Red Army, re-equipped and reinvigorated, began to push back the Germans, liberating occupied territories and inflicting heavy casualties. The dream of a swift victory had turned into a nightmare, a costly war of attrition that would drain Germany of its resources and manpower. A world reshaped the enduring impact of Barbarossa. Operation Barbarossa, initially conceived as a lightning strike to knock the Soviet Union out of the war, backfired spectacularly, becoming one of the most significant turning points of World War II. It marked the beginning of Germany's downfall, dragging the country into a war on two fronts that it could not sustain. The failure of Barbarossa had far-reaching consequences. It effectively ended Hitler's dream of a vast German empire in the east. It opened up an eastern front, diverting German resources and manpower away from the fight in North Africa and Western Europe. This, in turn, relieved pressure on the Western Allies, allowing them to regroup and eventually launch their own counter-offensives. Most importantly, the tenacity of the Soviet resistance proved to the world that Hitler's Germany was not invincible, a realization that bolstered the Allied war effort and paved the way for their ultimate victory.